Hello and welcome to my Emerging Insights project presentation. In this video, I'm going to go over what I ended up doing for my final project, why I chose this for my final project, and what I did to get to this point. The trend I am covering today is brush theory. Brush theory is a trend that's been going around in art spaces, primarily TikTok and Instagram, where someone redraws the same piece of art using different brushes. This trend has been done entirely with 2D as far as I am aware, and in this project I'm experimenting to see if it can be done in 3D. I've chosen this because I was trying to do something like this with my previous experiment to project live painting on a physical canvas onto a 3D model. Unfortunately, due to that program not working, I am instead going to focus on stylization in general. Stylization is a common topic within game spaces, primarily with the rise of AAA games getting more and more realistic, while indie games are slowly getting more and more stylized, whether that be cel shading, painterly styles, comic book styles. Regardless, indies are being more adventurous with those types of stylization. From my research, as well as my own personal experience being both a 3D artist as well as a person who plays video games, I've seen a strong rise in the realism versus the stylization, and it seems to be more of a balancing thing. Where something has become overwhelmingly positive and popular within one half, the indie scene comes up behind to try and balance it all out. I'm deeply fascinated with this stylization, and I wanted to do that within my experiment. The main brief for this project was to create different styles of 3D model textures and present them in a similar way to the brush theory videos. This is to showcase how different styles can influence how a model feels. For the scope of this project, I've limited this to 3 visual styles, which are realism, painted with lines similar to how I personally do my 2D artwork, and hatching. The objectives for this project were create a color palette and work out what materials are going to be on the model, such as metal, leather, and plastic. Create my 3 different texture sets, and pose and render a turnaround in Unreal Engine. As for my timeline, I will show that now on the screen. Getting approval for the project was important due to this not following from my initial experiment, that being a technology, and pivoting from that into a trend. As for the timeline, this was nearly perfectly followed. Week 11 had 2 out of the 3 texture sets created, but there were slight delays due to other commitments and technical issues with trying to get, this was me working on the hatching aspect, getting the hatching to look nice. These were then quickly completed during week 12 and not many delays actually occurred. After getting approval, I found my model, that being Delta from Agora, and started designing what styles I wanted to use. I wanted to experiment with styles I did and didn't know to make sure I got a broad spectrum of my familiarity. Most well known in 3D is realism with, again, it's mostly used in AAA games. It is also commonly used in specifically Adobe Substance Painter with a lot of presets and smart materials that followed more realistic styles. And with hatching, I know absolutely nothing about it in both 2D and 3D, so this was my extremely experimental one. After gathering reference material, I then started designing my textures in Substance Painter and initially tried to set up the model to do the select color mask trick to make my life easier. But considering you have to do that in Maya, and I tried to do that in Substance Painter, it didn't work, but I still technically set up the masks to make my life easier. Realism is the easiest to do, again, due to those built-in features. So this didn't take me too long aside from actually getting my colors and playing around with a bunch of filters and generators. This was mostly used as a warm-up to get myself used to the program again, since I hadn't used it in, again, a year. And even then, that was my first time ever using it, and I didn't play around a lot with it. Then we hit my most familiar in 2D, my Crunchy Painter style. This one I had a vague idea on how I wanted to do it, but after fiddling around with it for multiple days, I quickly discovered that hand painting lines onto a character doesn't look great. So I mostly use these as accents and then added rough brush texture over it to still give the feeling of being painted. The hatching was when this really set on why I haven't seen this trend done in 3D. It's because it doesn't really work. There was no possible way to have the hatching stand out without pixelating it and making it look more muddy in a sense. So I ended up turning down the height map a lot more, which lowered that effect, but it doesn't look as awful now, which was the main effect of this. Finally, I posed my character in Maya, which you can pose it in Unreal. I'm just not familiar with how to do that, so I posed it in Maya, exported it, added all of my lighting, and rendered the turnaround, which you can now see. And with that, the project is technically completed. So let's go over the evaluations. Do the textures look visually distinct from each other? Yes. Despite having the same colors, they still have their own distinct look to them. Would these textures provide a different feel in each project that they are used in? This was a difficult question because these don't look incredibly distinct. It's not very apparent looking at them from a distance or looking at them at first glance. It's not. Would this be viable to do in industry and create the stylization using this method? Not at all. This is not good for in industry. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get the textures just to this stage with one model, and the stage being it's subtle, it's not extremely distinct, let alone the potential hundreds of models you would have to do for this. Almost all of these textures are not smart materials. These are all painted by hand. I've gone through every single mask and I've had to paint on these textures and edit the height maps so that way they look visually distinct and look like the brush. As for my final thoughts, I chose brush theory because I hadn't seen it done in 3D before, and now I understand why. It's not as effective to change the style directly on the models, and making a shader takes a lot of time and innovation to get it to work and look right, but they do essentially function as filters, which goes against how this trend operates. I was considering pivoting during my timeline to do shaders instead, but due to both time constraints and my realization that it goes against the spirit of the project, I have kept it this way, and I think there's still important lessons to be learned from how this looks. To create stylized artwork, 2D and 3D operate differently. There's a lot we can learn from each other's disciplines, but to implement it and have that distinct stylization from each other, there's different methods that need to be done to get it to do that. Stylization is still extremely possible and achievable in industry and in the 3D world, but there's a lot of new emerging technology and techniques that need to be experimented with and tested. I hope you learned something about why you don't do these trends in 3Ds, because they're not designed for 3D, they're 2D trends. At least specifically brush theory. Stylization is free for all. Thank you for watching.